this image so we can see that a little bit better. And pay attention here to this area, the crop and resize area, where we can resize the tiled image, and also the use crop size. So if we toggle off use crop size and we go back to our layer and do the same thing, you can see that we get a different type of result. Again, so two different options that for that. We can either maintain our center point by turning that on, or we can have it independent. So you have two different choices for that. The other really cool thing here is if we go to one-up view, you can see that I can try the different options. Maybe there's the letterbox option, the crop edges, the fill option. So we've got different ways that we can resize or rescale these. Let's go ahead and use the crop edges option, and also go over and turn on a different type of mapping. So if we turn on the perspective mapping now and start to rotate this back, you can see that our tiles are going to be inside of that particular perspective. So we can actually change that around. So let's scale this down a bit more and rotate this back, basically lay that back in our rotation. We'll just take that back a bit, and you can see now that we've got the ability to basically lay that down inside of this one construction that we see here in our schematic view. And the great thing about working with the different new filtering options is these surfaces, this would be a good example of when you might want to use the EWA elliptical weighted averaging, because we've got pixels that are sharing the same location here in our image. So it's going to be a little bit difficult to see in the Camtasia, but you can see that that there are these options that come up for these types of situations. So finally, what I'm going to do here is let's just switch to a one-up view, and I want to talk about some blending modes. So the action blending modes. Let's go ahead and change our scene a little bit. Let's go ahead and delete what we have here, and let's also kind of reset back to our background resolution. And I'll re-add this now as a layer, and let's reset the crops. And let's go turn the background back on and jump into the keyer. So let's go to the master keyer. Here I'm just going to sample the green screen. You can see that, of course, I can hover over the different parts of the image and make adjustments to my matte. We can even, of course, work with patches here, so we can go ahead and start to create a nice soft key. And of course, we can also use our garbage masks. So let's go ahead and quickly clean that up. Take the color down. So here's our keyed image over the background plate. If we run through the various different blending modes here, you can see that what's great about Flame 2011 is that all of the various blending modes work with their mattes and also with the transparency. So you can see if we just sort of run through these now, you can see in multiply mode I can adjust the transparency through the matte. You can also in spotlight, let's maybe make this a bit larger. Let's reposition that over here a bit. Maybe change the centering a bit, so something like that. So you can see we've got our various blending modes all working with each of the individual modes that we adjust. And you can see that they all work quite well. So again, no more workarounds for this kind of stuff. Everything just seems to work quite well right out of the gate. And let's just go back to min. I think that looks quite good. But let's go ahead and get rid of what we have here and take a look at some of the new maps that came in 2011. So let's go ahead and change the duration of our timeline again, and we'll go into a new image. This one's coming to us from McRae Laboratory in Japan, and thanks to them. I also wanted to thank again CBS Digital for providing us with the previous imagery. And let's go in and take a look at some of the new maps. So again, we've got parallax mapping, we have specular mapping, and we also have the new substance texture map, which is a really interesting construction of multiple maps as well as pixel shader all in one node. So we'll take a look at that in just a bit. But let's start with the parallax mapping. So I'm just going to double click on the parallax map and attach that to our image. And you can see that we have our parameters controls as well as our type of texture mapping. So again, we have that consistently across all of the various maps. We can tile them and mirror repeat them. And if we go into the parallax mapping controls, let's go to a one-up view and start to make some adjustments to the scaling. So you'll see that as I start to move the scaling, you can see that we're starting to get that kind of predator effect coming through these trees. So it's quite an interesting effect and something that appears really to be sort of a 3D look. And we can also adjust the bias here. You can see we can kind of play with the bias a bit as well. Now the interesting thing about the effect is if we reselect the main axis, is as we rotate that on the Y, you can see that the effect is starting to come out towards us in 3D space. But notice if I turn this image all the way on its side, it's actually a flat image. So this is the result of introducing the pixel shader architecture into this release. We're really able to not only work faster and with higher quality, but we also are able to really take advantage of that graphics engine that we talked about before. So let's go back to the parallax mapping now and start to play around with the scaling. Let's take that up quite a bit. And we can also play around with the bias a bit more, so maybe something like that. And then let's also talk about relief mapping. So relief mapping is another aspect of parallax mapping, and when we enable that, you can see exactly what's happening to that surface again. So if we orbit the camera around, you can see that we've got, again, sort of an illusion of 3D space applied to just a flat surface. Again, so it's a very powerful and useful tool. So it's really quite interesting, the ability to work with these new maps inside of this new pixel shader architecture. But really the best way to show you how all the new maps work is in the context of a new tool called Substance Texture. So that's another selection here within the maps bin, and we'll take a look at that now. In Flame 2011, we now have a new map which is called the Substance Texture map. And this represents procedural textures that you can bring into action and use with images. And they're quite powerful. There's actually a whole library of these substance texture maps that you can access when you double click on the substance texture icon in the maps bin. So let's go ahead and get rid of what we had there with our parallax map, and we'll reset our camera. And we'll reselect that image and double click on the substance texture. If we turn on the scan subdirectories, we can look down through the very many textures that come with the system. So they're broken into different categories, but you can see we can quickly browse all of the different types of maps. If we go into the one called ground, you can see I'm going to go ahead and select this one called Sand 2, and it's going to get loaded into action and automatically connected to our image. And here you can see that a substance texture map is really a construction of several maps as well as a pixel shader. And the great thing here is that we can actually take this particular construction and apply it to images. But let's start by taking a kind of a tour of what we see here with our different maps. So we've got our specular map, our normal map, our diffuse map, and our parallax map, as well as a reflection map that come in attached to our substance. If we go in, let's start by changing the type of tiling, which we've spoken about before. We've got our mirror repeat, our tile repeat, so we can mirror that or we can tile it out. Take our choice there. And of course we also have the ability to bring into this scene multiple lights. So let's go ahead and bring a light from the object bin into the scene. And you can see right away we get a reaction to that particular surface. In fact, if I go back to the light, let's disable the shading and actually throw away the light and start rotating the surface around. So you can see that our surface is completely flat, and we see that pattern on the surface. But let's go back and introduce that light again. We'll go ahead and connect that to our axis above our image and just start to pull that light back just slightly. And as we pull that back, you can see the texture kind of changes as we start to move that light. Now let's change the intensity of the light a bit so we can see that a bit better. And we'll also adjust the rotation here of the surface so that we can kind of see everything at an angle. So that's working pretty well. And remember, if I go all the way to the side, you can see that this is really just a flat surface, and if I undo that, you can see it really has sort of 3D properties baked into it. Let's go back now to the substance itself. We'll turn on regen. If we go under the materials, you can see that if we go back and kind of move this back into our default position, we can start to change the pattern as well. So if I go in, I can change the dunes themselves. I can change the shape of the dunes. So you can see I can start to play around with the way that pattern is actually drawn on the surface. And again, if I go back to the axis and start to rotate that, you can see it's starting to create more of a 3D sort of illusion there on the surface. So let's go back now and reset those parameters. You also have under the Basics menu the ability to change things like the hue. We could dial in a different type of hue setting. We could play around with the saturation, so we can actually colorize these. We can play around with the depth, the normal map, the emboss, the angle, the randomness, all that stuff all these parameters can be adjusted and also animated. We can also go in and start to play around with the patterns. We can change the patterns out if we'd like to. We can change the presets if we want. And we can also combine these particular constructions with images. So if we go back to this layer and we go ahead and re-add this image, you can see that I can bring the image in again, and I'll add an axis and just parent down from the image to the axis. And if I go ahead and parent that to the normals map, you'll see that if we zoom in, we're actually applying this pattern directly to our image. So again, any of the various images can be textured with any of the substance texture maps types that we have in our very large library of textures. So let's go in and hide the original image. I'm going to connect up the light this way, and let's just move that light back a bit more so we can kind of see things a bit better. So not only can I bring in, let's kind of rotate that around so we can see what's happening a bit better there. Not only can I bring in an axis and apply it to the normals map, but if I go ahead and bring another axis in, we can go in and attach that as well. We could attach it to any of the other maps. So if I could go in and attach that to the parallax map, again rotating this on its side to make it easier to see, we can go back to the parallax controls and we can start to scale that down. And with using the relief mapping option, we're really pushing down the pixels. So again, we're creating that sense of depth that we saw before on the parallax example. And we can again adjust the bias to try to create that kind of subtle look. So let's go ahead and move this back so we can see what's going on. And the next thing I'll do is introduce another layer. So let's bring in this layer of the woman here walking in the scene. And you can see that we can reposition her in the scene, something like that. But currently she does not have the effect applied to her. So what we'll do is simply in the schematic view go ahead and parent down to the same axis, and we can basically repurpose the same normal map, the same parallax map that we were using for the background plate. We can repurpose that and use that for our other objects in the scene. So let's just go ahead and do that. Let's go ahead and parent that now to our parallax map. And now when we rotate this around, we're going to see that we've got all of this sharing the same Z position. So let's go ahead and move that forward a bit. And you can see that now we've got the same mapping applied to both the background as well as the foreground layer with our woman with the cutout mat. And we can just sort of move that down. Now, the thing that's really interesting here is if we go in and just find a specific frame to park on, I could go in and I can of course move the axis above this layer. And if I do that, you can see essentially she's a cutout with the texture sort of locked in place on her surface. But what's even cooler, and again, once you start to get the idea of how these different maps work, is we could go in and select that same image, select its media layer, and reintroduce that particular media layer now as a diffuse map. And look what we can do now. I can select that axis above the diffuse map, and as I move it, I'm actually moving the image inside of the construction of the substance texture. So you can see this is quite a powerful way to work, because we can really get not only the higher quality but the performance with just a few images and a few maps. We can start to do some really complex, some very much more elegant design type things, some creative 3D design. Now, if you do have multiple images and based on you know, the speed that you want to work, of course Flame is a very fast 3D environment, you can at any time change the resolution here. So again, because we're not tied to the resolution anymore in terms of the look, we could just go ahead and apply a higher resolution value to all of our surfaces without compromising the look, because we are working with a new pixel shader architecture. So again, it's a much more powerful way of working, and again, producing much better results. Finally, I'd like to go back to the background image here with the forest, and let's go in and adjust the shine value. So you can see by adjusting the shininess of the surface, we start to create, again, very realistic, photorealistic looks on our background plate. It's starting to look almost like the surface of an oil painting, if you will. But again, I want to apply this particular more shiny look to my foreground image of the woman. So what we can do is go into our duplicate mode, and I can say let's go into duplicate, if I can find it, and let's just drag a duplicate to the green line from the one background image to the foreground image, and now we're easily linking those together so that we can create the shine effect across both of those surfaces and make the adjustments that we would like to create the look. Now, if we decide that we want to control objects in our scene, have some of the scenes affected by the lights, some of them unaffected by the lights, a long time request has been to be able to control the shading of the individual objects within a scene, and you can also do that with the new pixel shader node. So if I grab a shader, we can go back to the shader options and change from default to shading off, and now that particular layer is unaffected by any of the lighting in the scene. And again, of course, we could use our other options here, such as car paint. You can see that car paint option has quite a different look. So the looks that can be generated based on the different shaders is really dramatic. Fresnel, the Cook Torrents, anisotropic. So again, all of these different options are can be applied on an individual basis to all of your objects in your scene, and again, helped you come up with some really nice looks. So that's a good look at how we can work with the different shaders and the substance texture mapping with images in action. But let's take a look now at how we can also work with these pixel shaders and substance texture maps with 3D objects, something like 3D text. So let's go ahead and get rid of what we have here, and let's bring another set up in, which will illustrate this example. So let's go into our 2-up view. And it's essentially the same scene we'd seen before, but now I've introduced some 3D text as well as a substance texture map that's being applied to the 3D text. And what that is just like a brushed aluminum that we're applying here on top of this, this particular piece of 3D text. If we go to the specular map, you can see that as I make an adjustment to the effect, you can see that I can really start to enhance and adjust in very subtle ways the type of shininess on the top of that surface. So you can see that we can really get that looking pretty good. If I go back to the shader node, you can see that I can also go in and make adjustments to the shader. So you can see I've got the adjustments on the effect. I can also go in and make adjustments to the individual shaders. So maybe make an adjustment, something like that. We can also do that horizontally or vertically. And of course, we can also use the various different types of shaders. So if I go into a Cook Torrance now, you can see I can really subtly apply a different amount of roughness and get a different look. And we can also work with the Fresnel offset and the Fresnel factor, which will help us with our different grazing angles. The other thing that is very interesting as it relates to the angle that you're looking at the surface as the shader for the car paint. So notice that the colors can be changed, but also notice that as we start to move our viewing angle, depending on the angle, we see more or less of the colors, just like you would if you were looking at the surface of a car. So you can see that this is going to be, again, a really great way of creating very high quality looks on 3D geometries within action. So the combination of the brushed aluminum substance texture map and then also the various shaders that you can apply will create dramatically different looks. Let's go back to the anisotropic. We can go in and start to select the individual lights in the schematic view and start to move those around so we can see, again, as we move the light, it's not only reacting to the surface in the background, but it's also creating that nice specular highlight across the 3D text. And it's not dependent on just one light. Let's go ahead and let go of that light and bring in the second light, which is a bit closer here. And again, as we move that light around, you can see it's really independent of the first light that I was moving. And it's in a different location, and it's really affecting only the 3D geometry. So again, so much more control over the lights, such better quality, such an easier way of developing and creating really nice looks with a combination of these various tools, and again, never compromising the performance and the flame experience that we've come to know and love. So let's move on to yet another really great new feature inside of Flame version 2011, and that is the ability to output multiple outputs from action. So let's go ahead and have a look at how that works. So let's go ahead and bring essentially the same scene back in, where we see our 3D text and our backplate with our substance texture applied. So just talk about this for a second. When the decision was made to do the multiple outputs from a single action node composite, we thought that while implementing this feature, it would be great to go much further than simply outputting the basic mats from the action media layers. So it is now possible to output multiple composites from action, as well as additional channels such as normal maps, emissive maps, occlusion maps, and even Z-depth channels. So this is really a great new functionality within the software. So let's go ahead and sort of zoom out with a 2-up view. So you can see that I've offset these various layers in 3D space. And if I pick up the camera and move around, you can see that I've got my extended bicubic background. I've got the layer in front of the background of the woman, and then we have our 3D text that we were just looking at with our highlights on it. The thing I want to do next is I want to go down to the output menu. So you can see within Action now there's a new output menu, and you can see that currently we're looking at the complete scene. But if we say let's go ahead and add a new output, we'll go ahead and change that name. Let's change it to normals. We can go in and select all the objects, change the type to normal, and now we'll be outputting our normal map. So this is really great. We were able to that easily create a new output, and more importantly, we're able to output things like normals maps directly from our scene. So we have normal, z-depth, media mat, the comp itself, and also emissive maps. So it's great to be able to do that all from within one Action setup. Let's go in and add another output, and we'll rename this one the z-depth channel. And let's again select all the objects. We'll change the type to z-depth, which we now see has been put into one of our 3 outputs so far. But let's go into the schematic view, because there's times when you may want to exclude things from your output. So you can output multiple mats, you can combine the mats in different ways. Maybe you want 2 layers instead of 4 layers. That can all be decided at this point by using Alt-E to edit what goes in or out of that output. So you can see I can toggle on and off the woman, I can toggle on and off the text. Now it's possible to exclude the background. We have all the different options there in the edit output mode. And now if we switch back to our one-up view, you can see I can toggle this way through the various outputs. So we have our complete scene, our normals output, and our z-depth channel. And if we switch to the 3-up view, we could even change our outputs here. So we could say we want to have our complete scene there. Let's go to normals there, and let's go to the z-depth there. And you can see we can quickly show you that we have all 3 outputs live coming out of this scene. So now that it's possible to output multiple mats from Action, there's a lot of cool things that we can do. So let's go ahead and bring out the 3D blur tool out of the batch node bin here. Notice if I'm selecting the 3D blur tool, with Shift and Alt I can toggle through the various inputs. And what's really cool, in 2011 they took into consideration how you might want to work with parenting out of Actions with its multiple outputs. So as I've got something selected like the 3D blur tool front, as I hover over and move closer to the Action node with the multiple outputs, it automatically expands that out in what looks like a group node. But this will allow me to quickly parent what I need to that particular Action output. And if we just walk back down to the z-depth channel, we can do the same thing and connect the z-depth channel that easily into our 3D blur tool. So let's go ahead and work with our 3D blur tool. Let's go ahead and go to our result. Let's go to the depth. Let's turn on use the z-depth, and let's go ahead and create a pretty dramatic amount of blur so that we can see what's going on. The next thing that I want to do is go in and plot the various points. So you can see that I can take the z-plot tool and I can select these particular locations in my z-depth channel, and you can see that a line appears representing that location in the z-plane in front of the depthogram 2D histogram representing those layers in front of the camera. So this is really useful as well. So if you need to figure out where you want to place your particular focal plane, you can see that I can just go ahead and plot directly on screen. Once we know where that location is, I can pick up the focus plane widget and just move that, and you can see that the color coding is appropriate here. We see the far plane in red, the near plane in blue, and if I just park the focal plane on the line where I plotted for the woman, you can see that now she will be in the exact center of my focal plane. We can also start to adjust the near and far planes and kind of narrow that out so that we can see a more dramatic effect. So now our foreground and our background are out of focus, but the woman is in focus. And of course we can also change that around. So we can move that to be where the text is in focus, and of course the background elements have that fall off based on that Z depth channel, which we can view here. Finally, another nice hotkey to know is the control key. Just by holding the control key, I can actually tap on the location of where I want that focal plane to fall. So you can see that we quickly move that to the back, or we can again move that back just with control clicking on the woman, or again we can control click on our text and bring that back as our focus plane. So that's a pretty good tour of a lot of the new features that came into action in 2011. Again, a real emphasis on improving the quality and the various tools that allow us to produce even better results from Flame. But I'd like to take a look now at the stereo workflow. So we mentioned a bit about the stereo, introduction of stereo into the application, and now I'd like to take a look at how that would actually work in the implementation with Flame.